in court, I don't have a problem with you investigating me. What I have a problem is the fact that you lied to me when I asked you about it in court. Okay, so that in itself is a violation. Now, has he done it in the past? He's done it to several people. Terry Goddard, he's done it to county supervisors, he's done it to all of his critics, and that was part of what the Department of Justice was looking into when they filed their lawsuit, and they came to an agreement, and in their, what's the term? When they came to the agreement in court, when they settled, that's one of the things that Arpaio said, I'm not going to investigate, any more of my political critics anymore.
Right, that was the subject of the separate Department of Justice lawsuit. They were looking at the racial profiling, they were looking at some language access issues, like access to the courts, and they were also looking at these investigations, whether or not they would initiate sort of proceedings against him, and they decided not to as part of the settlement.
But a lot of the folks that were investigated or falsely accused of something, let's keep in mind that they sued, they pushed back, and guess what? They won.
Just two things. As Lydia said, Sheriff Arpaio lied to the judge. Just quickly, how is that not perjury?
Yeah, exactly.
Second is, if I understood the monitor correctly in a meeting a couple of months ago, he suggested that there was the possibility that he and his team might be granted greater enforcement powers with regard to this case. And I didn't entirely understand what that meant. What would that look like if that's true?
Yeah. We believe it is perjury, and we, in our submission of recommended steps, next steps by the court, said it should refer to the U.S. Attorney to investigate the possibility of criminal contempt and perjury. I think we had another federal crime in there, but I forget at the moment, that we believe was warranted by the facts. The additional powers, right now the monitor, which is a very important factor in the case, there's a team of 10 people on the monitoring staff. None of them full-time, but significant amounts of time and taxpayer dollars.
Can you talk about who these folks are?
Yeah, the monitor is Bob Borshaw, who has, and the majority of the folks on the team are folks who have gone up through the ranks of various law enforcement agencies. They were very much vetted by us. We nominated them along with a couple of others. Each side had to nominate to put up the nominations to the court before the selection, and we found that after doing a lot of diligence that they had done a good job in other cities, and they probably are still involved in 2 or 3 other cities, including Oakland, where there is basically a receivership, and others. So yeah, it's mostly law enforcement. There are a number of academics because there's statistical issues involved. There's a 5-star ex-general, or you're always a general. And they've done a very good, decent job. It's not easy, as they say. They've never seen, and they've been involved in many, both in terms of their own careers and in the role of monitors, in many agencies. They've never seen anything run as badly, incompetently, before you can get to intent as this one. Just literally incompetently. That's why it's always hard to parse out whether something is evil or stupid, but it doesn't matter in the end. In terms, yes, combination for sure. In any event, the monitor reports to the court. The monitor generally, at the moment, does not have the power to order the sheriff to do A, B, C, or D, or to stop doing A, B, C, or D. As Brenda was talking about, what this would do would give, at least in a limited area, but one that is a very important first step in terms of limited receivership, allow the monitor to have the final word in a particular area of MCSO operations, specifically these internal administrative investigations, a final word on what guilt or innocence, so to speak, of the person involved, and there's no further appeal other than the state courts, but nothing within the agency. The court found that these internal investigations were literally shams. They were part of a cover-up of the wrongdoing, and they were fixed in a way that no one would be found guilty. I think one person was found guilty and got a minor discipline. So there will be a great hue and cry when the court does, and the court will give even this limited power to the monitor to directly intervene and order, be the final say in a certain limited area, but in running of the MCSO.
In terms of the internal investigations,
Yeah.
right? I think somebody had another question. No? Any other? Yes?
Can Alpano appeal the decision that will be coming down on June 17th?
But it's very limited because they developed a strategy of actually acknowledging that they were involved in civil contempt as a way a number of months back to try to get out from one of the hearings. The judge said, fine, I'll take that acceptance, and we will still have the hearings. Because the key finding by the court is that they were intentional violations, which is a prerequisite for even a referral for criminal contempt. So there's very limited leeway for the sheriff to appeal. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried on some procedural grounds. They have not been shy about doing so. They have not succeeded in any appeal so far in this case over the last 5 years, but I wouldn't be surprised. They stated, what was the opening line of their submission on the court's findings? Quote, the sheriff was devastated by these findings. But we still remain interested in working things out because they're trying to avoid the criminal referral, which we think is quite probable and which we recommended.
Dan, if you want to go ahead and move over here, that would be great. Sorry, we didn't know he was going to attend. So, le estamos pidiendo ya que se mueva para allá.
It's a much nicer panel that way. That's it, thank you.
I saw somebody else with a hand raised.
Oh, you have the chance. Oh, that's I thought it was for me.
Can one of you sort of, and feel free to sort of weigh in about what the harm piece, because I think a lot of times we kind of forget about the real victims in this case. We recently, so over a period of approximately 17 months after the judge had ruled that Arpaio cannot stop and detain and arrest people based solely on their immigration status, he continued to do that, which means there were hundreds and hundreds of people who ended up in detention, immigration detention, after the judge had ruled that practice was unconstitutional and it violated their rights. And we recently have been trying to track those people down. And you know, our legal director, our former legal director, finally got in touch with one of the folks that we've been trying to track down, and he said to us, "You found me," and he was in the Eloy Detention Center, and he had been there for the past year? Over a year. And so this is really these are the real victims, and I think that we kind of lose sight of that because so does anybody want to talk about that?
Sure. So the injunction came down in December of 2011 when before we went to trial, and when the judge says you cannot stop people to ask them, solely because you suspect that someone's undocumented, and Arpaio continued to do that, this not only was related to some of the folks that were citizens that were here legally, but when someone was stopped and they happened to be undocumented, but because they were stopped because of the fact that they were suspected of being undocumented, those are also some of the folks that we're going to be looking for, like this person who's in Eloy. Now, some of the folks, the damages are horrible. Families were separated. People had to incur legal fees and then you have the cost, the human cost to this. I don't know how you would put a price on a human cost to this, because when you have families that are torn apart children that are left behind crying. Angeles and I have to deal with a lot, and Sal Reza and many folks here, Margarito and some of the folks from Somos America, we have to deal with a lot of the families that were left behind. The folks that didn't necessarily make it to the front page of the news, or the ones that Arpaio was talking about in his press releases. We're talking about the kids that were left behind that wondered, why didn't mom come home last night? Why didn't my dad, get stopped and then the men took him away? That's the human cost. There's psychological damage, there's economic damage, when the breadwinner get torn away, people lose their homes, people lose their stability, people get uprooted from their families. So it's not just the person affected that gets stopped, it's also the trauma, the psychological, the human trauma.
I would say that we are still very much in the process of looking for folks. I mean,
Yes.
Even the county now has agreed to pay this firm that is going to be running the compensation program $200,000 for the search, because we will be putting, and they will be putting materials in media in other countries as well as the U.S. Because we're very much looking, and it's not going to be easy. People happen to know folks who were stopped by the sheriff's office from December 2011 on. It may well turn out that it was a valid stop, because you can be stopped for a state crime. But we certainly are interested in getting all names, and any help is appreciated. But it's going to be a real chore, and we're committed to having funds available. So if at any point in the next year or so we can find people, they will be have compensation to make them whole. As said, we have asked that $300,000 of that be out of the sheriff's own pocket, and we'll see. I don't know if the judge will do it or not. He may feel that the civil contempt would give them a ground for appeal, because you're not supposed to quote unquote punish, but I consider that mild given the actions taken by this guy.
Can I also just add that from the beginning, when we initially filed this case, it wasn't about damages and seeking damages. We initially filed to stop these discriminatory practices, and it wasn't about getting him, putting him behind bars. It was about reforming the department. It has turned into both of those because of his dishonesty, bad behavior. Willful, ignorance. Willful ignoring of the order. Great.
Yeah, you can probably hear me from here. I just want to know how much is going on the part of the Phoenix Police and perhaps the Tucson Police and some of these other departments that are not involved in this litigation. Does anybody have any estimate about that?
Sure, that's actually a really good question.
It is.
Yeah,
It is.
It's a really good question, because when we sit down with all of the local police departments to say, well, here's the Arpaio decision saying that you can't stop people based solely on immigration status, they say, oh no, we're not like Arpaio. And the reality is that they are, and they are running the risk of violating people's civil rights as well. And I think the bigger picture here again is that we still, 1070 is still on the books, right? We have tried in a separate lawsuit to strike down that remaining provision of 1070. And to your question, Marie, the city of Tucson has been one of the worst offenders, because they are routinely contacting Border Patrol. They are stopping people for minor traffic stops and then waiting for Border Patrol to get there, and then referring people to Border Patrol and prolonging detentions solely to check people's immigration status. So it's the very same practice that was prohibited and declared unconstitutional in the Arpaio litigation. And so that's what that's the reality that we're dealing with, right? There's a new chief in Tucson, so we're hoping that we could, we're working through these local departments to pass some policies at the local level that limit enforcement of immigration, and particularly for vulnerable populations. And with the city of Phoenix, we're going to be asking all of you, when there's a new chief, to also pressure the city of Phoenix, because the reality is the city of Phoenix is the highest, they have very large numbers of deputies out on the streets. It's a much larger department, and they are the ones that are interacting with most of us, and so that's going to be part of our sort of strategy moving forward.
Yeah, I just want to also add that I think the damage that Arpaio has done is not just to those individual families, but because he is constantly on the media, I think that he has influenced the rhetoric that basically has defined what Arizona is. And so there's different states that have looked to this state to see the practices that he did, how he enforced local immigration, and also the other police departments that are also that have also been watching. So I think it's super important that we decide how this narrative ends, because we'll be sending a strong message about how we respond to this type of practices.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I had the opportunity, was invited to a couple of years back to visit Utah and talk about what happened here, because they didn't want to happen to that community in Salt Lake City to happen here. And so it was quite interesting to share that experience. And I also want to give kudos to the ACLU for taking the court's order and taking it to the different police departments. And for example, I heard that in Mesa they were quite receptive, and they look at the court's order and said, well, in order for us not to be the next Arpaio, let's look at some of these changes so that maybe we can implement some of this so that we can protect ourselves, which I think is a good thing. And thank you for doing that, ACLU.
There have been some positive changes, and Mesa is one of them. Tucson is also one of them, but they are not complying with their own policies. And South Tucson, those are the 3 police departments that have made changes to their policies. And the one in Tucson actually is a really good one, because in their policy they stated that they're not going to allow school resource officers to question kids about their immigration status, which happens in our schools. And so that's a whole nother forum topic. Do folks have any other questions? Yes?
A lot of these people were physically abused. Broken fingers, hands, arms, broken jaws, smashed faces. Are there going to be any remedies for the physical abuse of these people?
Yeah, so the people who were detained, who were stopped and detained after the 2011 preliminary injunction, our proposal is to have a baseline for compensation, and then an additional amount of compensation depending on what that individual had to go through, whether it be prolonged detention that was very, very long, whether it be that they had their possessions taken and never returned, or if they experienced some other sort of trauma.
I know it might be difficult to do, but is there any way that individuals can be held responsible for individual acts, and I mean criminally?
Theoretically, it's going to be difficult, but yes, theoretically, sure. You need a prosecutor who's going to take the case.
So what exactly is the likelihood that this will go to the federal level and be taken to the Attorney General of the U.S.? What is the likelihood?
Yeah, so it would be the U.S. Attorney's Office who would have to initiate criminal contempt charges.
What is the likelihood? On a scale of 1 to 10, Brenda, we're putting you on the spot. What do you
Well, we can't really say for sure if Judge Snow is going to make that recommendation, but we think that it's really likely that he
Like a 7, maybe?
Based on language that the judge used in both his order and at the hearing last week, we think a recommendation is going to be very likely. But I do have to say that even if Judge Snow makes that recommendation, that doesn't mean that the U.S. Attorney's Office has to initiate those criminal contempt charges. It really is all up to the U.S. Attorney. And that's why this letter that the CAB is putting together, that they want to submit to the U.S. Attorney's Office, is really important.
I think we had a question over here. Yep.
In 2003, Arizona DPS had a profiling issue that resulted. Did ACLU use that as a reference in this?
Yeah, Eleanor Eisberg was the head of ACLU then, and I worked on that case as a cooperating attorney.